The chapel was quiet, too quiet. You could hear every cough, every shoe shuffle, even the strained exhale of the air conditioning that couldn't keep up with the midsummer heat. My hands gripped the edge of the pew, knuckles pale. I tried to hold my breath between sobs, to muffle the sound of mourning in a room where silence had always been demanded of me. My father's photo sat on a wooden easel near the altar, framed in black, surrounded by white lilies. It wasn't a glamorous picture, just one of those simple moments where he looked up from the porch with a coffee cup in hand and that half-smile he always wore when he was trying not to laugh. Seeing it made the ache in my chest spread deeper. He was gone. Really gone. And the moment they closed the casket, something inside me cracked. The tears came hard, sharp, desperate. Not loud, but unhideable. My shoulders trembled. I didn't care who saw. Grief poured out of me like it had been held back for years, and maybe it had. That's when I felt the tap on my arm. I turned slightly. My mother was seated beside me, face rigid with that steel composure she'd mastered long ago. Her voice was low, but every word landed with the precision of a knife. "Stop crying. You didn't even deserve his love." My heart stopped. Not just at what she said, but at how naturally it came from her lips, as if she had rehearsed it. As if she had waited for this moment, this lowest possible moment, to finally say it aloud. I stared at her, trying to register the cruelty. My face wet with tears, chest still heaving, I waited for a flicker of regret, of softness. But she simply turned back toward the altar, folded her hands in her lap, and sat motionless like she'd just adjusted a picture frame slightly off-center. I wanted to scream. To storm out. To hurl my pain like a stone into that quiet chapel and shatter the glass calm everyone else seemed to maintain. But I didn't. Because I was used to it. Used to her detachment. Used to the emotional tightrope of growing up in her shadow. I turned my face away, toward the aisle. The tears kept coming, but now they felt different, hotter, heavier. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was shame. It was rage. It was the awful feeling of being unwanted, even while mourning the only person who ever made me feel human. The eulogy began. People stood and spoke about my father, his steady presence, his quiet wisdom, his humor that didn't always land but always came from the heart. They called him dependable. Honest. A man who didn't speak much but showed up for the people he loved. I closed my eyes and tried to hold on to those words. Because I needed to believe them. I needed to believe he loved me, not just in passing, not just out of obligation, but in that deep, real way that mattered. Because if he didn't, then maybe my mother had always been right. Maybe I was never enough. But even as that thought surfaced, something inside me pushed back. I remembered how he used to bring me peppermint tea when I had nightmares as a kid. How he always stopped by my school plays, even if he slipped in late and stood in the back. I remembered the note he left on my graduation day, scribbled on a folded napkin, "I know today's loud. But I see you. And I'm proud." That wasn't nothing. That wasn't undeserved. I held on to that. Tight. Even as the service ended. Even as hands touched my shoulder, offering hollow condolences. Even as my mother walked ahead of me, untouched and unshaken. Because somewhere deep down, despite her words, I knew the truth was bigger than her bitterness. And if I didn't know how to prove it yet, I was going to find a way. Grief is strange. It doesn't always come in waves. Sometimes it just settles, like dust on your chest, heavy and invisible. After the funeral, I didn't sleep for 2 nights. I kept replaying her words in my mind, like a cruel mantra, "You didn't even deserve his love." But every time that voice echoed, it bumped into something softer. Something truer. Because I remembered things. Not grand declarations. Not Hallmark movie moments. But small, sturdy things. The kind that don't need to shout to be real. Like the way he always left the porch light on if I was coming home late, even when I was in college and only visited once a month. Or the way he used to pat my head gently on his way out the door. Not a hug, not a kiss. Just that brief, grounding tap like he was anchoring me to the earth. He wasn't the loud type. He didn't do speeches. He didn't fight back when my mother cut me down at the dinner table. But every now and then, when she left the room, he'd glance at me and say just one word, ignore. And sometimes, that word felt like a full defense. I remembered the peppermint tea. It was our quiet ritual. When I was younger and had night terrors, I'd creep down the stairs like a ghost, trying not to wake anyone. And every single time, he was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with the light on, waiting with a mug of tea and a folded paper towel for a coaster. He never asked what the dream was. Never forced me to talk. We'd just sit in silence, sip our tea, and exist. Together. I remembered how, when I got my first job and didn't tell anyone because I didn't want the family's backhanded congratulations, he left a brand new set of pens and a notepad on my pillow. No note. Just a quiet acknowledgement. And then there was the letter. It wasn't long. Maybe 5 or 6 sentences. He had scribbled it into the corner of a crossword page, tucked it inside the book I'd left on the coffee table. It said, "I know your mother makes things hard. I don't always get it right, but I see you trying. Don't let her voice become yours. Love, Dad." I had found it 2 years ago. I never told anyone. I folded it and hid it in the back of my desk drawer like it was sacred. I used to pull it out and reread it during the worst nights, when the house got too loud or when her cold words pierced deeper than usual. And now, he was gone. But his words weren't. Neither were the gestures. I clung to them like a rope in the dark, each memory proof that I hadn't imagined it, that he had loved me in the only way he knew how. Quietly. Intentionally. Without noise or performance. Maybe that's why it hurt so much when he died. Not just because I lost a parent. But because I lost the one person in the house who ever made me feel like I wasn't a mistake. And now that he was gone, my mother felt emboldened. As if his silence had always been her permission, and now, with him gone, she could speak freely, unchecked. But she was wrong. His silence wasn't weakness. It was restraint. And now that he couldn't defend me, I would have to defend what he left behind. His belief in me. His quiet love. And most of all, his truth, the one I was finally beginning to believe for myself. When people say someone had a difficult childhood, it often sounds like code for something darker. But mine wasn't filled with shouting or bruises or chaos. It was filled with something worse, coldness that looked like order. Cruelty that dressed itself as structure. My mother never yelled. She didn't slam doors or throw dishes. She made you feel small by simply ignoring the parts of you that needed warmth. Like the time I won second place in a poetry contest in middle school. I handed her the certificate, my cheeks burning with pride. She looked at it, then said, "Second? So someone did better." That sentence followed me for years. When I made the honor roll, she said, "Well, it's not valedictorian." When I dressed up for a dance, she looked me over and said, "Is that the most flattering color on you?" When I got my first heartbreak, her advice was, "You must have done something to push him away." There was never blood, never visible damage. Just a quiet erosion of spirit, one line at a time. And through it all, my father was the only buffer. Not perfect, God, no, but he was something warm in the cold. A flashlight in a dark hallway. He'd slip me an extra piece of cake when no one was looking. He'd ruffle my hair when I walked past, even if my mother scolded him for messing it up. I think part of me survived just by being in his quiet orbit. But my mother? She had a way of rewriting reality. She'd say things like, "I raised you to be strong," when what she meant was, "I refuse to comfort you." Or "You've always been too sensitive," when what she really meant was, "You reacted to pain I preferred to ignore." By the time I was in my 20s, I had mastered the art of detachment. I could sit in a room with her and keep my face still, no matter what she said. But inside, I was always spiraling, trying to decode if I was wrong, or if she was simply incapable of being right. The truth is, she didn't break me all at once. She wore me down. And at the funeral, when she whispered, "You didn't even deserve his love," it was like the final stamp. As if all the subtle messages she'd spent years layering into my bones had been given an official seal of approval. I walked out of that church carrying not just my father's death, but my mother's verdict. It wasn't just grief I was drowning in. It was shame. Shame for feeling too much. Shame for needing love. Shame for believing I ever deserved more. And maybe the worst part? A piece of me believed her. That's what emotional neglect does. It makes you doubt your own memory, your own needs, your own value. But as I sat in my apartment that night, the windows open and the sounds of distant traffic floating in, I pulled out the note from my father again. I ran my fingers over the faded pen marks like they were scripture. Don't let her voice become yours. That line. That one line was beginning to matter more than all of hers combined. Maybe I couldn't change the past. Maybe I'd never get an apology. But I could stop repeating her voice in my own mind. I could start listening to his instead. The one that told me I was seen. That I was trying. That I was enough. And maybe, if I held on to that long enough, I could find a way to heal. It started with a cardboard box. A plain, unmarked one tucked beneath a pile of winter coats in the back of my parents' closet. I was there alone, helping clear out my father's things because my mother said she was too busy and I knew where everything was anyway. She hadn't even stayed home that day, said she had errands to run. Left me in a house that still smelled like his aftershave. I didn't expect to find anything. I'd gone numb after hours of folding button-up shirts, wiping down dusty picture frames, and carefully wrapping his old reading glasses in tissue paper like they were relics from a life that had already started to feel distant. But then I found the box. It was heavier than it looked. Not full of clothes or tools or books. Just a few items wrapped in fabric, and a small stack of papers tied together with a rubber band. And at the very top, an envelope. It had my name on it. Just my name. I stared at it for what felt like a full minute, afraid to touch it, like it might dissolve if I did. When I finally opened it, the letter inside was written in his handwriting. I knew it instantly, the slightly tilted slant, the way he looped the G's too tightly, the faint smudge of his left-handed ink strokes. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm sorry I didn't say more while I was here. I always thought I had more time. My throat tightened. The room blurred. You probably heard something awful at my funeral. I've seen the way your mother talks to you. The way she makes you feel less. I want you to know she's wrong. She's always been wrong about you. I started to shake. My eyes refused to blink. I read on. You've always had a light in you. It's quieter than others, but it's steady. I didn't know how to protect it the way I should have. I let things slide. I stayed silent when I should have stood up. I'm sorry for that. There were pauses in his words. He wasn't a poetic man. But he was clear. You didn't have to earn my love. You just had it. From the start. That broke me. Tears came fast, flooding everything. I couldn't hold it in. I pressed the paper to my chest like it might sink into me. His words, his real words, not filtered through my mother's bitterness or anyone else's opinions. He saw me. He loved me. And he knew. I hope one day you'll stop questioning what you're worth. I hope you'll stop carrying her voice in your head. And I hope this helps, even a little. Because I loved you, exactly as you were. Always. It ended there. No dramatic sign-off. Just Dad and the date scrawled beneath it, from nearly a year ago. He'd written it long before he got sick. Before the hospital visits. Before we knew time was running out. That meant he'd been thinking about me. Worrying about me. Long before he had to. That meant it was real. I sat on the floor for hours after that, letter still in hand, rereading it until I had it memorized. Until it replaced every cruel line my mother had ever said. She could speak all the venom she wanted, but this was truth. This was evidence. Not just that he had loved me, but that I had been lovable all along. And nothing she said could ever unwrite that. The house looked the same. Same white shutters, same porch with the chipped step no one ever bothered to fix, same wind chimes that never quite matched. But something about it felt smaller now. Or maybe it was me, finally larger than the shame I used to carry through its hallways. I hadn't told her I was coming. I didn't plan a grand speech. I wasn't there to argue. I wasn't even angry. I was just done. She was sitting in the living room when I walked in. Legs crossed, the local news murmuring from the TV, a half-empty cup of tea on the side table. She barely looked up when I entered, just offered her usual glance that hovered somewhere between disapproval and mild annoyance. "You're back early," she said, as if I'd just stepped out to buy bread. I stood in the doorway for a moment, the envelope in my hand. The letter inside was creased and soft at the edges now. I had read it dozens of times. Slept with it beside me like it could guard my dreams. And now, I was going to use it to do something I'd never done before. Tell her who I really was, without needing her to agree. "I found something," I said. She didn't answer. I walked into the room, sat across from her. For a moment, she glanced at the envelope in my hand. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, the only sign that she recognized it. "It's from Dad," I said. "He wrote it before he got sick." Still, no response. I took a breath. "He knew how you treated me," I continued. "He saw it. And he didn't agree with it. He said I didn't have to earn his love, I just had it." I unfolded the paper slowly, keeping my voice steady. "He said I had a light in me. That I was enough. And that I should never let your voice become mine." At that, her lips parted. The faintest crack in her mask. But she didn't speak. I kept going, gently, not for her, but for me. All those years. I believed I wasn't good enough. That something in me was broken. And every time you cut me down, I told myself maybe I deserved it. But I didn't. I never did. And I don't need your version of me anymore. Her jaw tensed. "I did what I thought was right," she said finally, sharp but quiet. "No," I replied, "you did what made you feel powerful. And you convinced yourself it was love." She looked away, eyes flicking toward the window. I leaned forward, softer now. "This letter? It changed everything. It gave me back the pieces of myself you tried to bury. And I'm not here for an apology. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm just here to say, I'm done carrying your story about me." She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just sat there, suddenly older, suddenly smaller, in a room that had once held all my fear. I stood, folding the letter carefully. "I loved him," I said. "And he loved me. That's the truth. Whether or not you choose to see it." And then I left. No slamming doors. No final insult. Just the sound of my own steps, steady and free, down the hall and out the front door. I didn't look back. Because the truth wasn't behind me anymore. It was in my pocket. And finally, it was mine to keep. The cemetery was quiet this time. No floral arrangements. No crowds. No whispered insults disguised as concern. Just me, the wind, and the hum of distant traffic softening the silence. I stood at his grave for a long time without saying anything. I had nothing rehearsed, No grand monologue to spill. Just the letter in my coat pocket, folded and unfolded so many times it was starting to feel like cloth instead of paper. I knelt beside the headstone and brushed away a few dry leaves. The engraving was simple, his name, 2 dates, and the words, "He was steady as the stars." I never knew who picked that line. Maybe my mother. Maybe someone from the church. But it fit. He was steady. Quiet. Constant. And even now, weeks later, that steadiness still held me like an anchor in the dark. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. My tears had done their work. This visit was something else. I found the letter, I said softly, letting the breeze carry the words. It helped. I paused. She said I didn't deserve your love. A small gust tugged at the edges of my coat. But you knew better. You made sure I'd know better too. And that changed everything. I sat down in the grass, legs crossed like I used to sit as a kid during story time. I remembered how I used to wait for him to finish the newspaper so he could hand me the comics section. How he always tore out the crosswords for me, even though he secretly liked doing them himself. Small things. Ordinary things. But in a house where love was rationed, those scraps had been gold. I'm not going back there, I said. Not really. I said what I needed to say. And I think she heard it, even if she'll never say so. I pulled the letter from my coat and placed it gently on the stone. I didn't need to keep it anymore. Its weight had done its job. I'm building something new now. A life that doesn't make me shrink. I smiled faintly at the thought of the little apartment filled with warm lamps and mismatched mugs, of friends who didn't measure my worth in silence or shame, of the simple peace of being fully myself. There was no dramatic swelling music, no cinematic moment of release. Just a quiet exhale. The kind that comes when the storm has finally passed and you realize you survived it. I'm okay, I whispered. I really am. The sun broke briefly through a curtain of clouds, casting a soft light on the stone. I took it as a nod. Not a sign, I didn't believe in signs, but maybe a coincidence that felt just close enough to meaning. I stood, brushed the grass from my jeans, and gave the stone one last look. Thank you, I said. For seeing me. And then I walked away. Not in sorrow. Not in anger. But with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. A sense that for the first time, my story belonged to me. Not to the mother who tried to shrink me. Not to the grief that once drowned me. Not even to the silence I had learned to live inside. But to me. Fully. Finally. Freely.